Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about Benefic versus Malefic in medieval Renaissance astrology. So, this kind of ties into the sort of standard media popular approach when you're talking about the terms sort of good and bad. So basically, and then sort of the astrology pop version, which is, again, ties into that. That's a combination, basically, I think, of OCD, anxiety, and learning from social media posts. So they have this sort of superficial understanding of stuff, and it's very emotional. And so the sort of standard approach of good and bad is good is if something is good, it's 100% good all the time in any amount for any purpose. It's great. That's what you want. Go for that, and you can't go wrong even if you have 10,000 tons of it. Perfect. Bad. That's 100% bad all the time. Okay, if something's bad, it's always bad for all purposes, all the time. It's horrific, instantly deadly in the tiniest amount, and it's terrible for everything. Okay, you want to run from that no matter what. So, this sort of approach is not very nuanced. It's useful for emotional reactions. I mean, this sort of theater of your psyche, but it's not an accurate mapping of reality. So, really what we're touching on here is a very deep aspect of reality. And that is that what we see as good and bad, good and evil, however you want to put that, from our perspective, both of those are inextricably intertwined. And so Ursula Le Guin says light is the left hand of darkness and darkness is the right hand of light. So again, in certainly from a Buddhist perspective, from I think anytime anyone's going to look at this on a deep level, you recognize that reality contains and transcends all binary oppositions. Okay, and I think that's again not something that would necessarily be from a Christian perspective, but you can see it in Islam. In the Surah of the Rising Sun, it says to Allah to save me from the evil that you have created. So recognizing that the ultimate reality again contains both good and evil, and again, like I said, transcends both these any kind of binary oppositions. Okay, so that's kind of heavy. That's kind of theoretical, perhaps. It has practical implications, and really, if we're talking about medieval Renaissance astrology, it kind of gets this idea of benefic and malefic. So, again, the superficial understanding with benefic would be good, malefic would be bad. Good benefic is good for everything, malefic's bad for everything. And again, that's how that sort of popular approach comes into the thinking out. Now, medieval Renaissance astrology aspires to be an accurate mapping of reality. Okay, it wants to predict. So in order to predict, you're going to have an accurate map of reality. Okay, if you map a reality, if you're ever surprised about anything, you need to change your worldview. You need to change your understanding of reality. Okay, if you understand reality perfectly, you never ever be surprised. Nothing would ever surprise you. You know what's going to happen all the time. So obviously not possible for an individual person, but this is again what medieval Renaissance aspires to and has to be nuanced. So again, a couple things as we think about this benefic versus malefic. It very much depends on the perspective. Okay, so for example, pest control talisman. Obviously, benefic for the homeowner, getting rid of the pests. Malefic for the pests because they're getting killed or destroyed or whatever that by the pest control. So again, very much. And you can even do that in a wealth talisman. If you get the wealth, someone else probably isn't getting it. Maybe it isn't necessarily a win. Maybe it's a zero-sum game. So it also depends on context, benefic versus malefic. So very much on the specific chart and the situation that you're looking at. Even in that particular chart, people ask me, what does the moon in the first house mean? And sort of joking, they'll say nothing. I mean, it could mean 19 different things depending on the specific context we're talking about, the chart we're looking at, and even in the chart, what context that, the moon, it plays a lot of different roles, has a lot of stuff going on, and that's going to depend on that. So very much depending on both perspective and context. So when we talk about malefics and benefics, I mean, we immediately key into this idea of Saturn and Mars as the malefic. So Saturn is the greater malefic, and Mars is the lesser malefic, and Jupiter is the greater benefic, and Venus is the lesser benefic. Now, the term malefic and benefic is kind of also free floating, and again in this sort of nuanced view, any planet can be a benefic and any planet can be a malefic depending on the context. So we need to understand that in terms of just going Saturn is bad, and Jupiter is good. And again, in modern astrology, you're not using essential dignity. You don't have that, for example. And this is what the first thing we're going to talk about is essential dignity. So Bonatti, Guido Bonatti, who is a medieval astrologer, this is his considerations. That's on my website. You can I'll put in a link there. It says the 32nd consideration is if in fortune a malefic is a significator, look at his condition. In other words, look at his essential dignity. For it's good, then good will come a thing. If it's bad, then bad things will come about. So he quotes another astrologer saying, a malefic planet strong in his own house or exaltation, not joined with any other fortune to impede him, is better than a fortune retrograde afflicted. So in other words, what he's saying is a well-dignified, unafflicted malefic, which is Saturn or Mars, is going to be better than Jupiter or Venus if they're afflicted as a significator. Basically, we're talking about a horary question or a natal chart. So what we're keying into here is the entire essential dignity system. So again, Saturn in sign, in exaltation, triplicity, is basically going to be able to get the job done, get you positive results as a significator, say in a horary question, or if you're asking, will this person pay the debt back, and there's Saturn, in Aquarius, for example, it's like, well, they have the capability, and also they're not necessarily going to be, holding it back or whatever. They have it in a particularly good, generally in a good mood if they're well dignified. Now, the thing I would say about that is that that Saturn, even well dignified, is going to have a sort of tinge of melancholy and solitude. So that the underlying sort of nature of the planet is going to come through, and Saturn has that. Again, what is generally considered to be, people don't consider being solitary to be good. They don't consider to be melancholy to be good. Ficino has a whole, he had, just like I had Saturn Aquarius rising, and he equates melancholy both with depression, but also with genius. I'm not saying I'm a genius, but there's also this level of being in touch with the deeper wisdom, occult philosophy, esoteric arts and sciences that comes along with a well-dignified Saturn. So again, we want to consider the planet's essential dignity as well, and before we make some snap judgment about whether it's malefic or benefic. So the next thing to consider also is whether or not the planet is ruling a malefic house. So Venus or Jupiter, highly dignified, sign or exaltation, ruling the 8th. If you're asking a question about, like, say you're asking a health question, will I recover from this illness? And the first ruler is applying square to Jupiter. Oh, that's not, that's Jupiter's good though, right? Except at Jupiter, and Jupiter's well dignified. That's good, except he's ruling the 8th. So that would be an indication of health problems, maybe even death. I mean, again, depends on the circumstances. As to whether I wouldn't judge death on one question. On one signification. So. Interestingly enough, I mean, if Jupiter was in detriment and ruling the 8th, that would be even worse, okay? So when you're talking about malefic houses, you wouldn't want them to be ruled by a planet that's strong in essential dignity or highly afflicted in essential dignity. I mean, the best thing for, say for example, you want to know, will I recover from the illness? You look at the 6th ruler, which is illness, and the 6th ruler is peregrine. It's like, great, not a very strong illness. It's weak. That's what you want. You wouldn't want it strong because it'd be a strong illness. You wouldn't want it afflicted because that would be even more of a problem. It would afflict you. So you can see the nuance that goes into looking at this. So again, in my approach, if you have an applying square or opposition of any planet, and that would include Jupiter or Venus, that's still going to be problematic. The fact that it's Jupiter isn't necessarily going to take away from the problem that it's a square. I mean, if I'm having an election and it's a moon talisman and the moon applies to square Jupiter, I'm still going to consider that to be problematic for that election. So another thing I think to think about, this is a deeper issue, is the idea that, you think Jupiter is wealth, the good fortune, power, Venus is love, sex, pleasure. I mean, everybody considers that to be good things. While solitary, frugal Saturn and disciplined Mars, why would you want to go work out? That seems like sweating and all that sort of stuff. Why would you want to do that? Too much Jupiter and Venus are definitely problematic, though. Too much pleasure, too much indulgence is not going to be good for you in the long run. Whereas the virtues of Saturn, that discipline, that frugality, that strength and everything that goes along with those planets, well, is maybe unpleasant at the moment, is going to bring you these long-term benefits. So again, these all lots of considerations to think about when we're talking about malefic versus benefic. But again, what we want to get out of is this idea of this very simplistic view of there's, like I said, malefic is bad 100% of the time, always bad, and we can always put our finger on a particular planet or whatever is always going to be bad, or an astrological factor. Very much depends on context. It very much depends on what the situation is. We also want to consider the long-term goals as well. And some say rejection is divine protection is something I'll say. When I don't get something, maybe that's for the best. Getting everything we want is not necessarily the best thing for us either. So lots of different issues with that. But I thought I had a student ask me about malefics and benefics, and I decided it would be a good opportunity to have sort of a deep dive into it. Hope you find that useful and interesting, and sort of like I said, sort of just scraping the surface of the kind of detail and and accuracy that we can get from medieval Renaissance astrology.